Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second edition of the SkyConnect, the month of July. Every aviation story has a protagonist. And for today's show, we have a protagonist, the indefatigable Chief Executive Officer of Kenya Association of Air Operators, who is with us today. We shall be discussing the aviation landscape in Kenya, where we are at, how the skies look like in the continent of Africa vis-a-vis Kenya. We shall be unpacking, very importantly, the recently signed Finance Act 2026. And we shall also be discussing about the aviation policy in Kenya and taking other developments into discussion today. We shall have 1 hour of the SkyConnect. As usual, this is an interactive show. If you have questions, you use the Q&A tab, and I shall be taking that as we move throughout the show. You can also use the comments, the chat box for the comments, and we shall be relaying that as we continue with the discussion. Without further ado, the show is on. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Thank you, Maureen. It's such an honor, and I must thank AFRAA for really giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts around the aviation landscape. I'm looking forward to it.
Welcome on board, AFRAA's and Africa's voice of African aviation. And first things first, tell us about yourself and what does the Kenya Association of Air Operators do?
Thank you. So my name, as you've rightfully introduced me, is Liz Aluvanze, or as others call me, Engineer Liz Aluvanze. I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the Kenya Association of Air Operators. And the Kenya Association of Air Operators, or as we call it, KAAO, is the national umbrella body of advocacy for the civil aviation. I can see a comment here. I don't know if my sound is okay for your guests, but I will continue. I hope, Maureen, you can hear me correctly. But yes. KAAO is the national umbrella body of advocacy for the Kenyan aviation industry. We were established in 1967. So we are 59 years old this year. So we've been here for quite some time. And we represent the entire aviation sector in Kenya under one body. And how we categorize them is basically in two categories. We have the ordinary category, which is the AOC holders. And I'm proud to say we have about over 90% of the AOC holders here in Kenya represented under KAAO. And of course, that entails your scheduled and unscheduled operators, your training organizations, your maintenance facilities, your remotely piloted aircraft systems, your balloon operators. All these people come under one umbrella. We also have under the associate category people like insurance firms, fuel marketers, financial institutions, law firms, and everyone in the larger aviation landscapes that supports the business of air transport. Currently, we are 69 members strong, something we're very proud of. And basically, our day-to-day entails working, as I call it, like the midwife, between the operators and government and other government institutions. I'm sure something you're familiar with, whether it's the regulator or the aerodrome operator or the National Treasury. We really are the in-between between operators and those institutions, trying to champion and ensuring that their operating environments, of course, is business friendly to ensure that the businesses continue to grow. In a nutshell, that is what KAAO is, and that is who we represent here in Kenya. So we're the baby AFRAA, I think, here locally.
Yeah, the baby AFRAA, but you're 1 year older than AFRAA.
Yes.
1968.
Yes.
But doing quite a lot for the Kenyan aviation market. And you have been the CEO for the last, is it 3 years?
Yes, 3 years now.
Okay.
Entering the 4th year, yes.
And what are some of the achievements in your last 3 years as the CEO of KAAO?
I'll try to stick to 3 just off the top of my head. I think the first and most important is I know when I took over an industry that was very disenfranchised. A lot of the members had walked away, typical of any lobby organization, for one reason or another. So I'm proud to say that since I took over, I have managed to grow the membership almost 3x. And that is why we have 90% of the landscape of operators here in Kenya. Another thing we're proud of is, of course, and I know we'll be touching a lot about it, is on the fiscal space of the tax policy. For the last 3 years, at least, we have managed to advocate for the removal of taxes that were previously there in the sector. So that has been a really, really good thing for us, because what you have seen, of course, has been the exponential growth of the industry in terms of aircraft imported, companies really growing and really expanding their fleets. So that has been great. I think a third and most important thing also that we have championed is in the rulemaking process. And this is the Kenya Civil Aviation. When I took over, of course, how regulations used to be made is KCA, they sit in a dark corner. On a light note, they came up with some regulations, publish them, and then, of course, expect industry to implement them almost immediately. So we have really championed for KCA to adopt a rulemaking process where now they have industry participants and experts as part of the rulemaking process. And of course, with this, you've seen a great improvement in terms of developing regulations and implementing regulations, because now industry is part and parcel of coming up with those regulations. So I would say those are the three things I'm very, very proud of that me and my team have been able to accomplish, because it takes a village really to get some of these things done. So I have a great support system behind me as well.
Yeah, great. Those are very commendable achievements, especially on matters having a policy formulation that is participatory in nature with the stakeholders, so that it's really relevant to the stakeholders concerned, and also on growing your membership into 3 times fold from what you found it before. So how many airlines are part of your membership?
And we have 50. Kenya is an interesting market. Yeah, Kenya, I know in the KCA registry has 78 AOC holders, but of course, in terms of those that are active, I think we can say we have about 54 really active AOC holders. So of those, we have 50 under our membership.
So almost all Kenyan airlines are members of KAAO.
Absolutely, yes.
Well said. So there's a lot of weight on your shoulders to represent their interests in the Kenyan market.
Yes.
And you're doing a good job quite at it. In fact, what we'll be unpacking in detail is the finance, which is now a finance act, and the aviation policy in Kenya. And before we go back into the Finance Act, we want to really get a picture for the benefit of our audience. I'm seeing quite a number of our participants, are good number of them from Kenya. We also have a good number who are not from the Kenyan market. So it's quite a learning opportunity to see what is working in Kenya, how the industry is operating in Kenya. We also have some operators on the call who operate to Kenya. So that's why the discussion is important for them. So to understand, to get a snapshot of the Kenyan aviation space in terms of connectivity, safety, and infrastructure, can you unpack that for us?
Okay, great. Maybe I will start by some stats, because it's always good to contextualize and I'd just to give a quick post-COVID in terms of numbers. Of course, for Jomo, 2023 aircraft movements were about 98,000, and we saw about 6.8 arrivals into Jomo for that year. And for Wilson, where we're based, and I like to compare the two airports because, of course, it's very important. One helps to defeat the traffic from Jomo. The same year for 2023-2024, movements were 93,000, and the passengers handled were 837,000 thereabout. When you fast forward to 25-26, and of course this is projected, for Jomo, we saw aircraft movements at just over 108,000, with the passenger movements at about 7.6 million. Wilson, on the other hand, we saw movements at about 99,000 and passenger movements at 923,000. So Maureen, I'd just like to pause there because I know you know how Wilson is. It's a very small airport, and you can see the amount of traffic it handles. It's literally competing par and par with Jomo in terms of movements. And I'm proud to say that I think in terms of passenger numbers handled, this year we're looking to surpass the 1 million mark. So Kenya is seeing a steady increase in terms of movements at an average of about 10% yearly. And of course, we hope to surpass that even this year, despite the challenges I know, and I know globally we've all been facing the same challenges of fuel with the war and other things that keep on emerging. So I'd just like to put those numbers in context because I think it's important for the audience to understand that. Of course, Kenya is also quite a dynamic country. We have other regional airports. I think last I checked in the KCA register, they were saying Kenya has over 300 registered airstrips. So that is what also makes the industry quite dynamic. And we do have a lot of smaller operators who, do the safaris in between these airstrips before connecting them either to Wilson and Jomo. I think I can pause there in terms of numbers, unless there are any questions.
And airports, how many airports in Kenya?
I was told over 300. KCA is in the process. Yes, airports and airstrips. Of course, some are privately owned. Some are owned by the Kenya Wildlife Services. Of course, some are under the Ministry of Interior for security purposes. But the ones that are oversighted by the Kenya Airports Authority are 23. Those are the big commercially viable airports, whether it's your Mombasa or your Diani or your Kisumu. Those are all managed by the Kenya Airports Authority, including Jomo Kenyatta and Wilson, where KAAO is based. So that is just the landscape of how Kenya operates in terms of AOCs versus the landscape in terms of infrastructure that is available.
It's quite a vibrant industry. We have a number of airports, airstrips, and airlines, very many airlines, and those that are actively operating, as you've mentioned, 54 is a big number for the size of the Kenyan market, which really makes it relevant and necessary for the government of Kenya to create a conducive aviation environment in Kenya. That's true. Now, what matters connectivity? How connected is Kenya to the rest of the African regions, and in terms of the connectivity, both international, we have some of the airports are doing international operations, others are just doing the local flights. Can you take us through the connectivity?
Yeah, I think Kenya has quite a high connectivity index, and I think that is something we pride ourselves in. So I think we have great connectivity, whether it's domestically. We have a lot of players also who are quite connected regionally, the likes of JumboJet, Skyward, SafariLink, who I know you're all familiar with. And of course, we have our national carrier, Kenya Airways, that of course takes the traffic further, whether it's up north to the United States or to the UK. So I think as a market, we are very well connected, if anything. And of course, we're also going to see a lot more connectivity coming. It's something that I know a lot of my operators are working towards in terms of moving from serving just domestically and really opening, especially the East African bloc, with even a bigger push to maybe consider having the EAC as a domestic market. And I know we'll get to some of those conversations in terms of things we would like to see for the future. So I think in terms of connectivity, I would score us a strong A, but I think we can get an A star if we continue to put all our ducks in order. Absolutely.
And to make it attractive.
Exactly, for investors. Yes.
And what about safety? How is Kenya faring on safety matters?
We also score quite highly on safety. I know the last ICAO safety audits, I believe we got over 90%. I know there's one that is about to come. I know the regulators may have a bit more information on that. Do we have the occasional incidences and unfortunate accidents? Absolutely. So that is something also as industry, we're trying to really go back and reflect and take lessons and learn from mistakes, just like any other jurisdiction when it comes to safety concerns. Also, we tend to, as KAAO, what we've done also for members, we've introduced a safety mechanism sort of governance structure, where, let's say, the less experienced or the young operators can learn from the more established operators in terms of safety practices or safety cultures to help improve their safety indexes internally. So safety is something we take very seriously. We try to learn from mistakes, of course, to avoid any eventuality of the same happening again. And I'm sure we will score very well in the next KAAO safety audit. I don't doubt we'll go below what we scored previously.
It's commendable as well. And are there any specific safety initiatives being undertaken by KAAO, matters advocacy, for example?
Yes, we do hold internally safety forums, for example, and we have a good relationship currently ongoing between ourselves, who mostly represent the commercial operators, and Aero Club, who represent the general aviators. So every month we sit and we conduct what we call a safety series, where we exchange even sometimes people who've gone through horrific accidents come and share their experiences and lessons learned so that they can send some of those lessons to others. So that is one initiative we're doing ourselves. I know the Civil Aviation Authority also recently has started holding safety forums to also educate operators in terms of compliance and also international best practices, and also how to improve their own SMS systems internally so that we can all, we're all as good as our neighbors when it comes to safety. So it doesn't matter if one operator has the best and one has the worst. We really have to take this journey together. So I think those are two things we've really done properly internally. And the third thing I can say is as KAAO, between us, the Civil Aviation Authority and the Kenya Airports Authority, every 3 months we hold what is called industry affairs meeting, where we sit as stakeholders with the decision makers. Operators put all the concerns on the table, and we really fight it out. And when I say we fight it out, I mean it. We go into a room, we air our dirty laundry in the hopes of improving, of course, in the hopes of improving when it comes to the next. I don't know if my internet is working. I hope you can hear me. In the hopes, of course, of improving our safety culture also. So I can say those are three initiatives that we've done that have been really working well for us. And for example, the industry affairs has now been rolling for about 10 years. So you can see it's been a labor of love. It's not just something you stop. We hold ourselves accountable and ensure every 3 months we must sit down and discuss all the issues that are challenging the industry and also coming up with solutions. And recently, what we did in that forum, we also included the Accident Investigation Department under the State Department of Aviation, because we thought also it's a critical partner to have in terms of those conversations, because something the industry has been saying over the years is when it comes to incidents and accidents, and I'm sure a lot of the participants in this forum will agree, at times the rate at which the reports are released, not the intermediary, the final reports can tend to drag for years. So we're also really pushing them to really conclude the investigative reports, share them on time, and then we can still come back and debunk them as an industry. Again, just to ensure that we're learning from past mistakes.
That's quite commendable. So for the Industry Affairs Forum, who are the stakeholders that are part of it? You've talked about the accident investigations. Who are the other stakeholders that form that discussion, and who leads it?
Okay, so it's a tripartite, as I said. So we have KAAO represented, myself, and I go with my board members who represent, of course, the larger aviation sector. We have the Kenya Airports Authority, who is the aerodrome operator. So ideally, it is led by their general manager or accounting officer. He also participates with his general managers because they are the decision makers as well. We also have the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, led by the Director General, and he also participates with all his accounting managers, again, leading the several departments in the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority. And as I mentioned now, and KAAO also was very, and I'm proud actually, I should have mentioned, one of the greatest achievements we also did was to lobby for the creation of a standalone State Department of Aviation. So when that was created under the Ministry of Transport, The PS attends, and she also comes with now the AID department as part of that forum. So that is how we constitute. And every 3 months it's rotational. So if I host this month, KA will host the next month, KC will host the next one, and that is how we've tended to place ourselves.
And that's a very high level kind
Yes.
of discussions. We have the leadership from the airport, the Civil Aviation Authority, KAO, and the State Department for Aerospace.
Yes.
The objective, having such kind of engagement at country level is very helpful to discuss the issues and to ensure that we can move forward. So do you have sort of an action plan that is followed through from these discussions, and do you see traction from the kind of discussions and decisions that are made from the industry affairs?
Yes, we do see traction. So just like any other, we have our matrix format where we allocate tasks with deadlines. And of course, the work of K is to push those departments and people, because most of the times it tends to be KCA, we need this, okay, we need this, to enable our operators to work conducively. So we do see some traction. Some are slower than others, are quicker, of course, depending on the duty or the ask. But there's some traction. There's some traction we see.
Yeah, and that this kind of engagement is really recommended to be at each and every country level. And ladies and gentlemen, this Kenyan example is quite a good one on how we can have the key stakeholders meeting on a monthly basis to discuss matters aviation and to see how we can create traction to move forward the developments in aviation in the country level. Moving next to our core focus for today's discussion is the Kenya Finance Act. So the bill now is been signed into an act. I want you to take us through the bill as it was. What were the provisions? And I remember we did a lot of joint advocacy with IATA, AFRAA, KAO. We did our submission to the parliamentary committee. So what was there before? What were the recommendations? And now that it's signed into an act, what has been retained?
Thank you, Maureen. And yes, maybe just off the bat, for the sake of our membership, I think this time it was probably the proudest for KU in terms of submission, because as you've rightfully said, we decided to work jointly and was supported by both AFRAA and IATA. So the bill, what was tabled before it made to the act, I'll try break it down to the three main components. Or maybe for the sake of the audience, maybe I can describe the budget making process here in Kenya, and then we can dissect the bill. So Kenya, and I believe some other countries, every year there's a budget making cycle, which starts in September. Ideally in September, the government will give us what they called their budget estimates in terms of project versus how they plan to fund it. You fast forward to April, and they publish the finance bill. They then give stakeholders just under 2 weeks, and I think it's intentional, to go through the document and, of course, produce a memorandum and submit the memorandum in terms of comments, what's good, what's bad, what will work. And then thereafter, of course, you're given an opportunity to present it, as you rightfully mentioned, to the National Assembly Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning. They choose what to take and what to leave, depending on also things they're well versed on. And then they present that document to the National Assembly here in Kenya. It goes through 3 readings. After the 3rd reading, the document is then presented to His Excellency, the President, who then signs it and assigns it to law, effective every 1st of July. So the Finance Bill 2026 this time around, in terms of our aviation sector, was quite punitive. The first introduction it had was on the value added tax clause. And there they wanted to VAT, and our VAT is at 16%. They wanted to VAT importation of all aircraft categories, all aircraft parts and spare parts, and any parts thereof. They also wanted to VAT direction finding compasses and navigation appliances. They also introduced what you call the import declaration fees, which is an IDF. It's at 2.5%. This also was to be applicable to all parts and parts thereof. So anything to do with importation of aviation inputs was going also to attract an additional 2.5 on top of the already 16%. It also proposed to introduce what you call the Railway Development Levy fee. This again is at 2%, again on all those items that I've mentioned before. So you can see that was going to introduce, I think, a 20.5% additional cost on any aviation input coming into the country, again, so quite punitive. So of course, we knew that this would not be sustainable. Of course, we had to get all boots on ground, as you were saying, work with our partners, come out really with a strong document that we can present. And this time around, previously the committee, they listened, but this time they were very candid and hard. And I think, when you remember, they wanted more data-driven documents. They did not want stories. They wanted the facts and the numbers. So they were quite candid in saying you have to present your things factually. So of course, that was what was in the bill. So of course, what made it to the Act, let me start with the good and then I'll go to the bad, because this time also we have some things that we were not too successful on. And of course, now we have to see how to mitigate that. So of course, in terms of that, the good, because aircraft are categorized in 3 categories in Kenya, we have those under 2,000 kgs, then we do 2,000 to 15,000 kgs, and those ones above 15,000 kgs. So anything from 2,000 and above, VAT is exempt. Unfortunately, the ones that are below 2,000 are now incurring VAT in the Act. That is number one. The other thing that is now VATable, are the direction finding compasses, appliances, and equipment. So also those are attracting VAT under the Act. In terms of the RDL, that is the Railway Development Fee, again, unfortunately, the aircraft below 2,000 kgs are attracting both the RDL and the IDF. Fortunately, though, the spare parts under what you call Chapter 88 are exempt from VAT, IDF, and RDL. And I'll tell you the reasoning, which is quite interesting. It's always good to understand how the reason are. Of course, we always ask why the minute you started really putting a 20.5% tax on the smaller operators, you affect the whole industry, because remember, this is the founding blocks. These are our training organizations. Those are the ones handling that type of equipment. But it's interesting, the government's position this time around was saying, hey, Liz, it's an election year. We have an election year coming next year. So what tends to happen in their reasoning is that a lot of the political class import a lot of helicopters. So they said, and we need money. Kenya, all countries need money. So their argument on that, and they were quite straight and harsh, and that is why it stayed through, was saying, those are the people we're targeting. They can afford it. We hear you, what you're saying about your small operators, but that is where we are today, unfortunately. So in terms of 100%, we did not sail through. Maybe we got 80. So there's a gray area of an 80% that I can tell you, Maureen, for the last 2 weeks, we're still seeing some complaints and some challenges from operators, especially when it comes to the importation of spare parts, where you get the revenue authority, despite what is in the Act, at times demanding all of these taxes, even on some parts that have been exempt. So it will be a labor of love this year, trying to dissect, first of all, the Act, get an understanding between ourselves and the Revenue Authority. And then, of course, as KAAO, we have to do everything. And I know IATA and AFRAA will support. We will have to do everything possible to get those dropped and to maintain the status quo.
To take you back through the winners and the losers. Now, for the losers, the less than 2,000 kilograms aircraft operators are the ones that are heavily impacted, because if they're targeting that for those who will be focusing on the elections. But we have also commercial operators that mostly operating from Wilson Airport. And you mentioned it earlier, how many movements we do have at Wilson. So what will be the picture like if we continue with the situation as is for the small operators who still have the RDL, who still have the VAT that the others fortunately don't have to pay? How does this impact your membership?
Yeah, we've saw this before, as I mentioned, 2022, 2023, when I took over, they used to pay all those taxes, the small under 2,000. What we witnessed, and that's what we're trying to tell government, is quickly the deregistration of those aircraft in the Kenyan registry. Operators are smart, and smartly so. They will deregister this equipment because the cost of doing business is too much. They will register them in friendlier jurisdictions, and they will still come back here and conduct the business that they do. So I can guarantee you what we are likely to see is probably no or very few registrations of aircraft under that category. And for the business operators, of course, they must come up with other ways to survive. If that means carrying out their businesses in friendlier jurisdictions, I think that is probably what we're likely to see. And I think what governments need to understand is eventually that leads to less revenue collection by themselves. And at least as KAAO, we've been able to document that for the year 22-23. So this year also will be willing to document and see so that it can also help our case when we have to go through this again beginning, as I said, September. So I can tell you, we probably see less and less of those operators operating or trying to set up or invest in Kenya as a consequence of some of those punitive taxes.
Yeah, it will be important to really paint that picture for them to see that the aircraft will be registered in the neighboring countries, still operating to Kenya. So in terms of job losses, in terms of even business losses that they will have given to the Kenyan economy. And what about the aspect of maintenance for the aircraft? How does that?
In fact, that's a really, really good question. Just today, in full disclosure, I was speaking to one of my members who is already planning to set up a facility in Uganda because, again, it's just going to be too expensive if you want to also charge all these taxes on aviation inputs. And we know we import everything. There's nothing Kenya or any jurisdiction here manufactures. So all these are imports. Again, likely to see a very drastic drop in terms of maintenance activities with operators who are doing that kind of business. They'll probably go to other locations that are friendlier. And I like to joke, we were telling a member of parliament, you remember we told him this engine, I will just fly it to my neighbor, do my maintenance there and fly the aircraft back. Who was lost? As you said, it is Kenya, it is the jobs, it is the engineers. So there's a ripple effect that we will be monitoring very keenly, documenting so that we can report and present to ensure that those exemptions continue to stay and stick.
It's quite important to really put all that into perspective, having lost that opportunity. And even now, not just the aircraft being registered elsewhere, even the maintenance business going away. And what I understand is that it going to the neighboring jurisdiction is the same Kenyans who are servicing those aircraft, but they're doing it from elsewhere. So you can already see that the economic contribution is also being taken to another country, which is not quite good for the Kenyan economy. And what are the stakes now that it's signed? Is it concluded, or do we have a room for stronger advocacy to change the situation?
Yeah, the stakes, I mean, the act is the act. Unfortunately, that's the law currently. And I think, to amend any act, you again have to go through the parliamentary process. And allow me to put this in context with the manufacturers, because also we interact with them. They're going through the same consequence. Let me use one item of theirs, sugar imports, for example. They used to import sugar, I think, per kg or per 10 kg, they used to pay 2 shillings or something. Now it has gone to 40 shillings per kg for imports of sugar. So you see, every industry somehow has been heavily impacted by this act. And to amend the act, you have to wait until June, July the next year. I've never seen actually an act being amended mid the financial year, unless it's very critical. And that needs, of course, intervention from His Excellency, the Presidency. And I guess it must be something very catastrophic. What as KAAO we are planning to do, as I mentioned, we want to really engage the Treasury, because these proposals come from the National Treasury, just to get buy-in, because we already have buy-in from the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority. So our thinking is, if we get buy-in from our parent ministry and we take a really strong proposal to the National Treasury, they have the power in law to tell KRA for XYZ, do this, this, and that. So that is our thinking, without having to go through the whole legislative cycle. Because I'll tell you, if as an industry we say aviation, we've been hit hard, this and that, all the other industries will also come up in arms. So we are thinking, can we do it in a more quiet way, but still ensure that our things are looked into and some reprieve is given to our sector. And I'll be knocking on AFRA's doors, because we will need to go back together with IATA also to knock on those doors to help them understand. Yeah.
Yeah, AFRA will be more than pleased to join forces, because in terms of AFRA membership, we do have a number of our members who are operating based in Kenya, and it's in their interest and AFRA's mandate to represent and champion this important matter. Noting very, very importantly that we have had various turbulences in the industry, the most recent one being the Iran crisis impact. Now, for African airlines, profitability had been forecasted for this year to be $1.30. That is $1.3 per passenger. Now, with the crisis really taking its toll, the month of June, the figures were revised by IATA. It's much less, for 40 cents per passenger. So this is US 40 cents per passenger on average for all African carriers, noting that a few African airlines are the ones that are making profit. But what is very interesting to note from various discussions we've had with the airlines operating in the Kenyan market is that actually the smaller operators at Wilson Airport and alike are operating very profitably. And it's just that we don't tell those African stories. But now with the Iran crisis impact coming in, and then with such kind of policy at government level, I believe that that profit that was there is going to be wiped out. It's really important that we make a strong advocacy step on this. And 1 year, if we'll be waiting for the next cycle, June next year, I think it's 1 year too far away.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree.
And just to check on the questions, I see Geoffrey Haudo is asking, does this mean that after the elections, the RDL and VAT will be reviewed or dropped?
No, there's no guarantee, Geoffrey. Again, as I said, it will be interesting to see, because come next year, April, we will see. And I tell you what has happened, Geoffrey. For the last 3 years, the same proposals have been making it again. So they will tend to come back with saying, now we want to VAT all the aircraft equipment. It's a bit of a toxic cycle. And I hope we have some Tanzanians on the call, because I was exchanging notes with my counterpart there. What they've been able to do very successfully, and I need to go and benchmark, is to get a moratorium. They've gotten a 3-year moratorium, no more taxes on aviation. So that's what even we are starting to think. Should we now maybe change tact? Instead of every year doing the same thing, should we push clearly for a moratorium so that there's some reprieve, so that investors are comfortable and confident? I think we all know aviation is a very highly capital intensive. People want predictability. So we want to start thinking a bit outside the box. Or should we push as a block? I really like what the ECOWAS block has done, whereas a block they've said they'll be dropping. So maybe as EAC, we now need to hold hands together and push our governments as a block and say, if you really want East Africa to be a hub, some of these things need to be dropped in totality. Yes. And for a long period of time if need be, not every year going through the same thing over and over again.
Yes, it's quite important. And having that regional economic community approach is one very relevant way of addressing that. And then after we have the various recs having the taxes and charges harmonized, then we can now look beyond the recs and look at the African context. Now for ECOWAS, we had our SkyConnect a couple of weeks ago, and what we noted from the guests that were there, we had someone from ECOWAS, is that the implementation process, it takes time, but they have started. And it's a step in the right direction. For the East African community, there was a meeting that was organized by UNECA to put in place this harmonization of taxes within the region. And we do hope that this eventually can be the reality. It's a step in the right direction. It takes time, but we are moving in the right path. We also have various other initiatives at the REX level. So if we harmonize taxes and charges, and we also open up the markets and look at that as a domestic, then combining the two will really create sustainable aviation for the region. I'm looking at we have some more questions coming in. We have Sami Musioka. He asks, there are several KRA documents currently circulating which appear to indicate that all aircraft parts are now subject to VAT at the standard rate of 16%. However, we have also encountered differing interpretations. At the point of importation, should we object to these VAT taxes?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. It's quite a gray area. I'm dealing with these things case by case because it depends on the carrier officer you meet who's clearing your imports. I think I can see a comment from Beatrice, who happens to be our tax consultant, and she's helping us day and night to come to an understanding with KRA. You'll find, interestingly enough, some people bringing imports being told you must pay VAT, others bringing imports being told you don't have to pay VAT. So again, it's a bit of a gray area. I don't want to give answers that are not too factually or that have not been verified. And that is why we are continuing to engage KRA so that we can also communicate to our membership to say this and this and this and this parts, this is the implication. This and this and this is the implication. So it's still a bit of a gray area, to be honest.
Yeah, so I see a lot of need for sensitization. Is KRA working with KAO to sensitize the various stakeholders?
Yes, in fact, we met them last week. And what we're trying to do is to host them so that we can have a sensitization breakfast for our members. Because again, these are now, I think our membership or our operators were used that, for the last 3 years, they've not had to incur any of these things. So it's a bit of a learning curve for a lot of us. So we want to have them in the room so that they can walk us step by step on what people can expect. But we're getting great cooperation from KRA, I must say. A lot of them are even working with our tax consultant to see how we can circumvent or navigate these interesting times in terms of importation of spare parts.
And you talked earlier about the benchmarking with the Tanzanian jurisdiction on that moratorium. Are there also other jurisdictions that you also tabled to our Kenyan government on what they are doing right so that we can also benchmark and ensure that Kenya is not the only country that aviation is really expensive for operators in view of these high tax regimes? For example, we have other countries that, as per the ICAO recommendations, we don't have the VAT on aircraft and aircraft equipment. So are we doing some benchmarks to really table this to our decision makers in the country?
Yes, we have benchmarked quite extensively. I think if you recall, even part of our memorandum, we were able to demonstrate the various African countries which have following their care recommendations and not imposing any of these taxes. Some of them being, I think all of our friendly neighbors in Kenya are not imposing any of these taxes. So again, we're really trying to sensitize them in terms of competitiveness, what some of these new clauses will do for us as a hub here in East Africa. So we have benchmarked quite well. We have all that data quite well captured in our documentation.
And maybe also to consider adding the impact on the eventual travel demand, because if we have the ticket price being significantly higher, then we shall have the travel demand also being negatively impacted. I understand for the Kenyan GDP, aviation is about 3%, 3.5%?
Yes, about 2.5%. I think that was the IATA. And we're hoping to grow that, yes, we're hoping to grow that even to past 5 or 8%. We have great ambitions as an industry. So you're absolutely right. We need to demonstrate the impact in terms of traffic. Also, Kenya, interestingly enough, has an ambition of, is it 12 million tourists or 10? Don't quote me, I'll check the numbers factually. By 2030, I think they want to double the amount of tourists coming. So of course we must tell government, you cannot have such high ambitions. And the people essentially bringing these tourists and distributing them are not operating in a conducive environment. So I think we will have to paint that picture quite clearly going forward.
Yes, to demonstrate the impact to the GDP overall, if we continue with such a punitive tax regime, and also to really show them the figures, the operators in Kenya vis-a-vis the registration of the aircraft elsewhere, even the economic impact of people getting the opportunity cost of having to take that business elsewhere. So we are losing that out in Kenya. We'll be happy to support in terms of economic modeling, because what we note when it comes to advocacy, you really need to have data to show the various scenarios, and it really helps on that decision making. And I believe with concerted advocacy, we will be able to get some positive outcome out of this. And I know very well that our colleagues from IATA who have been working with us will be quite happy to continue working with us on this, to join KAAO in these forces for this Finance Act for the benefit of the airline industry. I'm seeing some more questions. Francis Mwangi, there is also need to check on the difference between charges, fees, levies, and taxes based on the ICAO Doc 9082. Yes, that's very important, Francis. Thank you. Looking at monitoring the questions again. I think we'll continue to take some more questions. And you back to your conversation regarding to avoid us getting into a yearly engagement on the taxes regime in Kenya. It will be important for us to look at the Kenyan aviation policy. We have this document. AFRAA was part of the consultants that sat with the Kenyan stakeholders to put together this document. But where are we at, and how can the Kenyan finance policy be a good guide and be a good stepping stone to have the tax regime that is supportive to African aviation, to conducive aviation operations in Kenya?
Thanks, Maureen, for that question. And you're indeed right. I think developing the policy again was a labor of love. If I recall, something that took an 8-year process, we finally get a document approved by Cabinet in 2024. But indeed, since then, what we have noticed as KAAO, and I'm sure you are part of the consultants, has been the implementation has been very slow. Yet that is the document, as you've rightfully said, that sets the blueprint for the aviation sector. Even embroidered in it is a favorable tax policy that, quote unquote, says no charges, VAT, levies on aviation. It is in that document that has been approved by Cabinet. But ironically, here we find ourselves where the same state and government is imposing charges. So where I sit, and I think as KAAO we have agreed, we need to put a very strong concerted effort for its implementation. I think that will help even fight half of our battles when it comes to these fiscal policies, because again, as I've said, it's the blueprint to everything and everything that we need to do as an industry to ensure we continue to grow. So where we are currently, I know as of last year, December, the National Assembly Committee on Transport had written to stakeholders to give their input, which we did. Fast forward this year, in March or April, I did receive a letter from the PS of State Department of Aviation to nominate someone to be part of the implementation team. So I think from where I sit, it is not to just push that agenda to ensure, as you're saying, we have all the relevant stakeholders, IATA, AFRAA, and any other stakeholder who needs to be part of that team so that we can sit down and, of course, come up with an implementation plan. And, of course, have a monitoring and reporting mechanism back to say that this is where we are and this is what we need to do. So even for me, as Liz, the other day I was reflecting, I was saying, if you want to make your work easier, Liz, just get this policy to be implemented. Then you don't have every year to be going through this toxic cycle, as I like to call it. So that is where we are in terms of where the policy is. Now they've written to stakeholders to say that nominate someone who's well versed, who can make decisions to be part of the implementation team. And that, of course, is being spearheaded under the Ministry of Transport.
It's quite important to note those developments, because a policy is only as good as its implementation. Happy to support as the industry organizations on how to bring that about. And we do hope that eventually that can be implemented, because it will really solve the rigors that we have to go through will be alleviated just by having in place that policy. Looking at the questions, Nelly Mayaka, Skyward, one of our member airlines, she's asking, can KAAO advocate for public airstrips without IATA codes, for example, Migori, rather than requiring interested airlines to bear application and processing costs? Noting very well that Skyward is one of the airlines that is opening routes that before were not served by air transport, and that's very commendable. So what's your take on this, Liz?
Interesting. I think we're always ready to serve our members. I think I have noted it down, and I know my team have noted it down. And of course, Skyward is also a member and a board member, so to say. So I think that is something we can look at. And I think I'll pick it up from this conversation.
Thank you. We have a question from Richard Powell. I will be interested in knowing if there is a national aviation strategy which looks at the future with growth predictions and infrastructure investment to support UAS opportunities. I think it's not very clear. Then he's also asking, UAS opportunities are being investigated also. The question is not very clear. Maybe Richard, you can repost. But on the UAS being investigated, do you have that on the Kenyan airspace?
Yeah, I know there's been a bit of challenge with the unmanned in terms of, and again, I always tell the Civil Aviation Authority, they have a heavy task of sensitizing the public, because of course, a lot of people tend to bring drones without necessarily knowing the regulations. In Kenya, I think before you bring a drone, whether it's for work or for personal use, even in your house, you must inform the CAA, you must pay registration fees. That is the only way you can get it into the country. And even in the country, I believe in some areas, if you want to use it, the CAA also must give you permission to do so, based on some security concerns that they may have. So that is what at times we tend to say, no, they've seized a lot of drones. I'm told in Jomo alone, there's about 5 warehouses full of drones because, again, unfortunately, you have the traveling public coming. You've bought a drone from a toy store, no harm. You just want to use it in your house. But of course, when you're coming back to the country with the customs officer, if you've not notified the CA, they take it and that's that. And there's no conversation about that. In terms of is UAS captured in the national strategy? Yes, it is in the National Aviation Policy. I think that is the same thing. That is our strategy. That is the blueprint. Of course, UAS are here to stay. They're part of our ecosystem and they have been captured. Then I think maybe, Maureen, what we can do after this, I'm more than happy to circulate the final policy. Maybe you can share it to the participants so that they're well versed with it. And then maybe even as we continue to work together for implementation, if there are comments, and there could be comments or things maybe we oversighted at the time, this is the time to make sure that they're captured in the implementation phase. But I know UAS was very well captured in the policy. That I saw with my own 2 eyes as part of the larger air transport, sector.
Yeah, it's quite important. I understand we also do have on the legislation side aspects that govern the unmanned aircraft.
Absolutely.
And we'll be happy to support in any ways from AFRA's perspective. I see a question from Kennedy Kionero, which would be easier, doing this battle annually or inviting OEMs to set up bases in Kenya? I think we already addressed the aspect of the annual battle, how we can solve that by the aviation policy. But what about the aspect of OEMs setting up base in Kenya?
Yes, I've been a big champion of trying to understand why OEMs do not want to be based in Kenya. And from the little that I've heard, of course, again, it comes back to the cost of doing business. Because, yes, and unfortunately, I think that is something most African countries grapple with. In Kenya, not only, of course, is the licensing regime very long and tedious in terms of all the permits you may need to set up. Yes, our labor is affordable. Our labor, of course, is very competent and we are a very skilled labor force. But another challenge I hear a lot of them quoting is also the cost of energy. And I'm sure, so Maureen, you've heard. Our cost of production is just too expensive. So I'm sure the OEMs, when they're running the numbers and they see in Kenya it is 4x just to get your power running as compared to maybe the jurisdictions they're based in, then it becomes a problem. Does government need to incentivize, and have we been pushing even the State Department to incentivize? Can they come here, you give them tax relief so that they set up? Absolutely, and I think it's something we really need to consider, especially now with the investments going on in Jomo. They want to build these grand airports. Maybe it's time to start having those conversations for attracting an investor to set up an OEM, because there's quite a lot of demand here, quite a lot of demand in terms of parts in Kenya and regionally.
And I do hope, since now we have a State Department that is in charge of aviation matters, such kind of agendas can be listened to and accepted and implemented to make Kenya an attractive destination for doing business, especially for aviation. And if you can have more OEMs starting to consider Kenya as one of their bases. I see a question from Youssef. We are currently evaluating Mombasa, Kenya as a strategic base for a new MRO facility. However, our primary risk metric for assist heavy investment is constitutional certainty. How resilient are Kenya's legal protections and special economic zone frameworks against sudden politically motivated changes to tax, laws, and property rights?
Okay. At least SEZs I'm quite familiar with. I think we know a couple of SEZs. I think the SEZs laws in Kenya are solid proof. I've not seen someone who set up an SEZ and because there's been either a change in an act or a change in, governance or president or all the political nuances that are very unique to Africa affect an SEZ operation. So I would encourage him to, of course, do his due diligence. More than happy to hold his hand and take him to the right offices so that he can do his KYCs effectively. But I'm yet to see a situation where someone who has set up in an SEZ is negatively impacted because they have their own standalone rules and regulations that they abide with, and those are quite clear in law.
Wow, thank you. And we'll take this last one before we close, as we have already reached the top of the hour. Curtis asks, for aircraft owners, leasing companies, etc., having been a technical representative, an engineer, for lessors and improvements to regulatory compliance for global Part 121 and 135 operators, FAA, EASA, CAA, etc., perhaps work with aircraft owners where they prefer maintenance on their assets, if new MROs are feasible for the long term. So I think this is on the discussion regarding OEMs setting base in Kenya. This is just an idea for consideration. Thank you very much, Curtis. And before we let you go, Liz, what will be your one key message to the industry? Could be to the government, could be to the stakeholders. What will be your one key message?
I'll talk to the stakeholders. And I think I've always said this, Maureen, collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. We need to move away from us versus them competition. I think, as I always say, you're only stronger than your next neighbor. I think as African states, African partners, as Africans, we really need to start working together as brothers and sisters. So if there's one message, and I think if there's one thing as KAAO we have tried to advocate for, is the working together collectively as a whole, because you do see a lot more progress and a lot more results when you do it together. For government, on a light note, if they could drop these taxes, I will be very happy. My phone maybe will stop ringing, but that is a conversation for another day, of course, yes.
Yes, so there's definitely need to collaborate and to continue collaboration so that collectively we can create a sustainable aviation in Kenya and also in Africa and beyond.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Liz, for joining us for today's show. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation. And for any questions that we may have missed, we will be doing that post-webinar with our guest so she can respond adequately to points that we could not cover during our 1 hour. And up until next time, it's goodbye from AFRA. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time. Have a good day.
Good day. Bye-bye.